Hello everyone and welcome to Wisdom and Wealth, the channel dedicated to helping those over 40 find deeper meaning and lasting prosperity in their lives. Today, we're embarking on a fascinating journey into Buddhist philosophy, exploring a concept that can be both intriguing and initially unsettling, the idea of no self. Now, I know that can sound a bit abstract, but trust me, as we unpack it, you'll find it has very practical implications for how you experience life, how you manage your emotions, and ultimately, how you achieve a greater sense of peace and well-being. This isn't just about intellectual understanding, it's about applying timeless wisdom to the challenges and opportunities of our modern world. We believe that understanding these concepts can lead to greater inner peace and clarity. And if you find this content valuable, please give us a like and consider subscribing to Wisdom and Wealth. Your support helps us bring these important discussions to a wider audience. There's something so basic, so fundamental to our experience, that we hardly ever pause to really question it. It's this deep-seated, unwavering feeling that, I am here. It's not something we consciously create or summon, it's simply present, a quiet hum that runs beneath everything we do. When we wake up each morning, that sense of, I, is usually the first thing we encounter. When we feel a twinge of pain, hear our name called across a crowded room, or gaze up at a breathtaking sunset, that feeling of being me, of being the central point of our experience, is always there, silent yet utterly certain. That's why the Buddhist teaching of no self can be so initially jarring. It challenges something we've taken for granted our entire lives, the very foundation of our sense of identity. It flies in the face of what we've always considered to be true, so it's natural to feel a little resistant or confused. This is where we encourage you, as we go through this journey of learning, to like or subscribe to this channel to receive notifications and more content to help you on your path. If there truly is no self, then who or what is feeling all of this? Who is experiencing this life that we're living? It's not merely an abstract philosophical puzzle, it feels profoundly personal. Whatever this I is, it seems to be the one constant, the one thing we can always rely on, the thing that feels closest to us, more intimate than our own skin. Rather than simply dismissing or rejecting this challenging question, Buddhism gently invites us to examine it with care and curiosity. To really dissect this feeling of I and see what it's truly made of. Is it as substantial and unyielding as it appears? Or could it be something entirely different from what we've always assumed? And if you're intrigued by this line of questioning, and want to support our mission of bringing this kind of content to others, please hit that like button and consider subscribing. It helps us reach a wider audience and create more videos like this one. To begin this exploration, Buddhism makes an important distinction between two kinds of truth. First, there's what's called conventional truth. This is the everyday reality we all inhabit, the world of names, labels, and shared agreements. It's the way we navigate our daily lives, using words like I, you, he, she, and they, without a second thought. We say things like, I am hungry, I love music, or this is my body, and these statements are perfectly functional and understandable within the context of our everyday interactions. Buddhism doesn't deny the validity or usefulness of conventional truth. It recognizes that this way of speaking and thinking is essential for us to function effectively and communicate with one another. But then there's ultimate truth, which delves much deeper. It pushes us to ask, when we say, I, what exactly are we pointing to? Is there a real, unchanging self residing within us, separate and distinct from everything else in the universe? Is there a singular me that has remained fundamentally the same from the earliest days of childhood to the present moment of adulthood? These questions are not just philosophical riddles to be debated in ivory towers. They challenge something far more fundamental, something we've always taken completely for granted. After all, what seems obvious is not always necessarily true. A mirage shimmering on the horizon may look convincingly like water, but when we approach it, we discover it's nothing but an illusion created by the way light bends in the heat. Similarly, the feeling of I may feel like something solid and real, but when we truly examine it, we might be surprised by what we discover. This journey of exploration doesn't begin with complex theories or abstract doctrines. Instead, it starts with something far simpler and more accessible, paying careful attention to our own experience. If you're enjoying this deep dive into self-discovery, remember to like and subscribe to Wisdom and Wealth for more thought-provoking content. Notice how natural it feels to say, "I am thinking," or "I am making a decision." Notice how deeply attached we are to this sense of I, how much we identify with it. And also notice, without judgment or fear, how uncomfortable it can be to even question it. We need to remember that the real question is not, do we exist? Of course we exist, we live, we breathe, we think, we feel, we interact with the world around us. The deeper question, the one that Buddhism is truly interested in, is this: do we exist in the way we assume? Is there something residing inside us that is permanent, separate, and fully in control of our thoughts, feelings, and actions? Many people misunderstand this teaching, often hearing "no self" and mistakenly thinking that Buddhism is claiming we don't exist at all. But that's simply not the case. This teaching is not about negating or taking something away from us, it's about revealing something deeper, something far more liberating and peaceful. But to see it, we must first be willing to question what we think we already know. So we begin here, with awareness, with curiosity, with a genuine desire to understand. There's no need to rush to a quick answer. No need to force ourselves to accept a particular belief. Just observe. What is this, really? Where does it reside? Is it the body? The brain? The thoughts? The emotions? When we look closely, not with anxiety or stress, but with a gentle, open curiosity, we may begin to notice something rather surprising. The I is not as solid and fixed as it initially feels. It shifts, changes, evolves, and never stays the same for very long. When we try to grasp it, to pin it down and define it, it seems to slip away like water through our fingers. Buddhism doesn't ask us to accept this blindly, as an article of faith. It simply invites us to pay attention, to watch closely, moment by moment, and to allow our own experience to reveal what is truly real. And so, we start, not with preconceived conclusions, but with the simplest, most honest question we can ask: who is this? Then, with quiet attention, we watch. Not searching for a quick or easy answer, but simply seeing what is actually happening, one moment at a time. Most people, when they first hear that Buddhism teaches no self, automatically assume it means that they don't exist, that their thoughts, memories, and experiences aren't real or valid. But that's not what's being questioned here. Buddhism isn't denying your everyday sense of being a person, with a name, a history, and a unique set of characteristics. It's pointing to something deeper, to a hidden belief that lies beneath the surface of our conscious awareness, the belief that behind all your constantly changing thoughts, emotions, and experiences, there is a fixed, unchanging me, a core identity that remains the same regardless of what's happening in your life. It's not about your name, your habits, or the roles you play in life as a parent, a spouse, a professional, or a friend. No one is denying that these aspects of your life exist. What Buddhism asks us to examine critically is the quiet, underlying assumption that beneath all these shifting details, there is something permanent, a kind of hidden owner or controller that has always been the same and always will be. Imagine someone holding an old gold coin. Over time, the coin gets scratched, worn, and tarnished, but the person believes that underneath all the superficial damage, the coin itself is still pure and untouched, retaining its original value and essence. That's how many people think about the self, as something steady and unchanging beneath the surface of all the changes and challenges of life. But is that actually true? To explore this question, we need to examine three common assumptions that many of us hold about the self. The first is that it is permanent, that there is a true me that hasn't changed in any fundamental way since childhood. But take a quiet moment to reflect on this. Are you really the same person you were when you were a child? Your thoughts, your emotions, your beliefs, your values, your perspectives on life, have they remained exactly the same? Probably not. Life experiences inevitably shape us, challenge us, and change us in countless ways. If everything that makes you, you, is constantly changing and evolving, what part is truly permanent and unchanging? The second assumption is that the self is independent, that it is in full control of your thoughts, emotions, and actions, like a captain steering a ship. But if you look closely at your own experience, is that really the case? When emotions like anger or sadness arise, did you consciously choose to have them? Did you decide to have certain thoughts pop into your head? Most of the time, they simply arise spontaneously, seemingly from nowhere. If there were a self in full control, wouldn't things work differently? Wouldn't you be able to simply choose to be happy, choose to be free from negative thoughts, choose to avoid making mistakes? The third assumption is that the self is one single, unified thing, a cohesive whole. But aren't there many different versions of you that emerge in different situations? The you at work, the you with your family, the you when you're alone and nobody's watching. Some days you feel confident and outgoing, other days you feel uncertain and withdrawn. Your thoughts often contradict each other, your emotions shift and change like the wind. If the self were truly one single, unified thing, wouldn't it always feel the same? Wouldn't you always feel consistent and predictable? People often cling to the idea of a fixed, unchanging self because it feels safe and comforting. It gives them the illusion of control, the belief that someone is managing the ship, making decisions, and keeping things running smoothly. That's why the idea of no self can feel so unsettling, like the rug being pulled out from under your feet. But Buddhism isn't saying that you don't matter, or that your life has no meaning. It's simply questioning whether this fixed, separate self that we've always taken for granted is really there in the way we assume. And this is where things start to shift. If this permanent, independent self isn't actually there, then maybe we don't need to hold on to it so tightly. Maybe we don't need to defend it, protect it, or be afraid of losing it. What we discover instead is something much more alive, something more flexible, more interconnected, and constantly changing. That's why it's so important to be clear on what kind of self is being questioned. Buddhism is not asking us to erase our personality, to stop being human, or to give up our sense of individuality. It's inviting us to look with fresh eyes at something we've always taken for granted, and to see if it really holds up under scrutiny. Because only when we clearly see what we've been holding onto can we begin to let it go, not as a loss, but as a kind of freedom. With a sense of spaciousness, joy, and freedom. The kind that would fill us with peace, happiness, and wealth. And if you find these lessons interesting and insightful, consider liking and subscribing to this channel. Now that we understand what kind of self we're questioning, that fixed, permanent, independent core, let's turn our attention to a crucial question. If that kind of self doesn't exist, then what is happening when we experience life? If there's no central I driving the process, how does everything still function so smoothly? Let's break this down step by step. In this very moment, you're hearing these words. Perhaps you're also aware of your body sitting or standing. Maybe you notice a sound in the background, or a thought passing by in your mind. These are all experiences. But how do they arise? It begins with contact. Our bodies have senses, eyes, ears, skin, nose, tongue, that meet the outside world. You see light and shapes with your eyes. You hear sounds with your ears. You feel warmth or pressure with your skin. And inside, your mind becomes aware of thoughts and feelings. This meeting between the senses and the world creates awareness. This is the first step of experience. But that's just the start. Next, a feeling tone arises, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. This response is largely automatic and reflexive, not something we consciously choose. If you hear a beautiful sound, it feels pleasant. If there's a loud, jarring noise, it feels unpleasant. If something passes by unnoticed, it feels neutral. This feeling tone follows immediately after contact, often so quickly that we don't even notice it happening. Then, the mind steps in to recognize and label what's happening. That's a dog barking. That's the smell of coffee. I'm feeling anxious. This recognition is shaped by memory, language, and past experiences. Without it, we'd be lost in a sea of raw sensations, unable to make sense of anything. But with it, the world starts to take shape and become something we can identify and understand. Next, our mental habits and intentions begin to respond. Based on how we label things and how we feel about them, we begin to move, internally or externally. We react. We want more of the pleasant, we want to avoid the unpleasant, and we're often confused or indifferent to the neutral. These intentions then shape our actions, our thoughts, our speech, our movements. The mind doesn't just passively perceive, it also wants, resists, plans, and remembers. This cycle constantly influences what happens next, creating a continuous stream of experience. Throughout this entire process, awareness flows gently through it all, like a river flowing through a landscape. It doesn't control the process, but it notices what's happening. It's like light illuminating a stage, rather than the actor performing on it. This awareness is how we begin to truly understand experience, not by trying to grasp it or stop it, but by calmly observing it as it unfolds. Now, if you feel this lesson is important for others, then consider subscribing to this channel. If we look closely at how we experience life, we begin to see that it's a dynamic, interconnected process, not a static or isolated event. There isn't a fixed self inside making it all happen. It's a complex system, with sense organs, feelings, thoughts, and actions all interacting with one another in a continuous dance. It's not a solid entity having experiences, it's the unfolding of interconnected parts working together in harmony. And here's the key, this process doesn't need a fixed, permanent self to keep going. In fact, it often runs more smoothly and efficiently when we stop clinging to that idea. Why? Because the belief in a solid, unchanging I often leads to confusion and suffering. It makes us ask questions like, why am I like this, or why did this happen to me? These questions, though natural, often lead to stress, regret, or blame. But when we begin to see life as a natural unfolding, a process rather than something happening to a fixed self, we can soften our grip and become more accepting. We stop taking things so personally, recognizing that we're all part of a larger, interconnected web of cause and effect. This doesn't mean we become passive or indifferent to what happens in our lives. It means we become wiser and more compassionate. We start to notice how things arise, the initial contact, the feeling tone, the recognition, the subsequent reaction. Instead of blaming ourselves or others for being human, we learn to engage with life more skillfully and peacefully. So, instead of asking, why am I like this, when you feel angry or joyful, you can ask, what's happening in this moment? What conditions led to this feeling? What's the contact, the tone, the reaction? By gently investigating, we begin to see the underlying patterns, and the more we observe, the less tightly we hold on to the illusion of a fixed I. In the end, we realize something surprising: life is not happening to a fixed self. It is simply unfolding through the continuous process of body, mind, and world meeting and interacting. When we observe this, truly look at it, we see that we don't need to chase the illusion of a hidden controller. We can just live, awake, present, and free to respond with wisdom and compassion. Once we begin to see experience not as something a solid me is having, but as a stream of events arising and passing based on causes and conditions, a new question appears naturally: if it's just a process, why does it feel so continuous? So personal? Why does life seem like a movie starring me, directed by me, and mostly about me? The answer lies in momentum. Like a river that flows because of all the drops of water behind it, our moment-to-moment experience flows because of all the forces that came before: thoughts, actions, habits, choices, intentions. Even if there's no unchanging self steering the boat still moves because the current carries it forward. And where does that current come from? It comes from what Buddhism calls conditions. Nothing in our experience arises randomly or independently. Everything depends on something else. When you feel joy, there's a cause for it. When you feel pain, there's a cause for that too. When a thought appears, it doesn't come from nowhere, it comes from memory, mood, attention, intention, sensory input, and more. This is not some mysterious idea. We can observe it directly. For example, imagine you hear your name spoken across the room. Even if you're distracted, your attention jumps immediately. Why? Because over time, your brain has been trained to treat that sound as important. That's the power of conditioned patterns. Now imagine how many such patterns you've built up over a lifetime, in how you respond to praise, criticism, stress, desire, fear. So the flow of experience keeps moving not because you push it forward, but because of the energy of these habits, shaped by your past actions, especially actions done with intention and craving. These form what we can call your personal momentum. Like a ball rolling down a hill, each action adds speed and direction. Some patterns are healthy, others are painful. But they all shape what you're likely to feel, think, or do next. But that's not the whole story. To understand what really fuels this ongoing process, we need to look deeper. Underneath our daily thoughts and choices, there is something more subtle, a kind of fuel that keeps the fire burning. In Buddhism, it's described as tanha, which means craving, thirst, wanting. It's not just desire for things, it's the deep pull inside us that always wants something different. We want pleasure. We want security. We want things to last. We want to escape discomfort. We want to fix things, hold on, control. This craving shows up in 1,000 forms, from simple habits like checking your phone to deeper patterns like needing to be loved, needing to be right, needing to feel safe. And paired with this craving is something even more fundamental, not seeing clearly. A kind of basic confusion or misunderstanding about who we are, what life is, and how things truly work. It's this combination, craving and confusion, that keeps the process going. Like a fire needs fuel and oxygen, our inner machinery runs on these two forces. They push us to act, to react, to cling, to avoid, to repeat the same cycles. And because we don't fully understand the nature of this machinery, we keep mistaking it for me. But here's the powerful truth, this cycle is not a prison. It's a process. And that means it can change. The momentum may be strong, but it's not permanent. The fuel may be burning, but it can run out. Each time we act with more awareness and less craving, we shift the current slightly. Each time we observe instead of react, we interrupt the momentum. Each time we see clearly, we weaken the misunderstanding at the root. This is why practice matters. Meditation, mindfulness, ethical living, they're not about being spiritual in some abstract way. They're about slowing down the machinery enough to see it clearly. To understand the causes behind our experience. To begin turning the wheel in a wiser direction. And over time, something remarkable happens. We stop asking, why is this happening to me, and begin asking, what conditions are creating this? We stop blaming or clinging and start observing. We begin to taste a freedom that doesn't come from controlling life, but from understanding it, deeply, honestly, patiently. In this way, we move one step closer to answering the big question, not with a theory, but with our own clear seeing. If no solid self is behind the wheel, then what's really happening? The answer is not hidden. It's unfolding in real time, right here, in every breath and every moment of awareness. Thank you for joining us on Wisdom and Wealth. And if you found this discussion helpful, please like and subscribe to our channel for more content.